Welcome back to Author a la Carte. And our next author is Fiona Forsyth. In Second Life, she is Finn Bookmike. Finn is from the UK and has always enjoyed writing, but thought it was something you did apart from a proper job. She read voraciously as a kid, first through Greek mythology, then through children's historical novels, and then the Greeks and Romans. And that's what happens when I misplace a note card.
I wouldn't worry. I don't know if any of you can hear, but the call to prayer for sunset has just started over here. So that's why I have such lovely background music.
I cannot hear it myself.
Oh, good.
Where are you located today?
I live in Qatar in the Middle East. If you fly to Dubai, but jump off an hour early, you land in Qatar.
All right. So Finn, tell us about where you're from and when you first knew you wanted to write.
Okay, so I was born in the south of England, and like Ursula said, I can't remember not writing. I just wrote. And with that, like Ursula went a love of reading. So I read voraciously. And I often think the two go together, especially for us more mature ladies and gentlemen from a pre-computer age.
If you're willing to share with us, how old are you and how has the era you grew up in shaped you as a writer?
I'm 54, and I think I was lucky because as a kid, there were no computers, so we read. But I have watched computers influencing and becoming part of people's everyday lives. And so I joined Second Life quite early on. I had a big gap from it and then I came back. But I think that just watching how people were first afraid of computers, then got used to them, and then can't imagine life without them has been it's been a huge influence on the way I have read, for example. And I love watching that.
Wonderful. And not talking about specifically published, but how many books have you written?
I have written 3 books, and they've all been published. 2 by an American children's library sort of publisher, Rosen, and they were non-fiction based in the Roman world. And then one which I've self-published on Amazon, and I'm working on number 2.
And how long did you work on Rome's End?
Oh, Rome's End. Well, the interesting thing about Rome's End is it was written in its first form when I was 26 over a summer holiday, and I had a very elderly Amstrad, which most of you won't remember, but was a computer. So I wrote a draft of that and didn't get anywhere with it. And then when I left teaching 25 years later, and we moved out to the Middle East and I didn't have a job, I started thinking of all the things I could do. And at the same time, miraculously, I became interested in Second Life again. I joined Milkwood. I found that I was writing stuff based on this novel from my 20s. And gradually, I realized that I was going to have to dig that novel out and rewrite it completely. And so I did.
Wonderful. And what first inspired the story of Rome's End?
Well, my background is in Greek and Roman literature and history, and I was teaching a speech by Marcus Tullius Cicero at what you would call, I suppose, grade 12 and 13. And in my reading, I came across a family, the Cestius family. And the hero, the young man of the family, struck me as very interesting because he rebelled and went off to fight a civil war under Brutus, the guy who assassinated Caesar. And then 20 years later, you find that same man, Lucius Cestius, part of the establishment, a consul under the Emperor Augustus. And it occurred to me that there must be a very interesting story around this young man and why he changed his views so much. And so I started looking at the family, their connections to Roman politics they start in the late 50s BC and they go right on into the 20s BC. And that's where it all came from.
Well, my next question was again about mythology, but you pretty much answered this, but I'll ask it anyway. You mentioned a love of mythology, and I was asking how has that impacted this book? But I don't know if that's a different question from what you just said.
I think it influenced because, like so many people, I got into the classics, Greek and Roman literature and history through reading Greek mythology. We're introduced to the stories as kids, even though they're full of the most horrendous violence imaginable, as well as some pretty dubious sexual themes. But we all learn about the Minotaur, the Argonauts, the Trojan War. And I started reading them when I was 7 or 8. And they were the things that stuck with me. And when I was very young, someone told me that you could actually go to university and study these things. And that was my burning ambition. From then onwards, I was going to go to university and read the classics, even in an age where Greek and Latin were dying. It was very difficult to find anyone to teach me Greek, for example. I was lucky enough to go to a school that taught Latin, but a lot of it I had to do on my own. And it was that sort of grim determination that kept me going. And I'm sure it was inspired by those first Greek myths, because Greek heroes never gave up. And that was clearly what you had to do.
So this book is the first in a series. Tell us where you're taking us next.
Well, this book is the one set just before the assassination of Julius Caesar. It will cover the assassination. It will show us our hero making that crucial decision that he is going to side against the establishment with the assassins. And we know that he did because we have a coin that was minted by him as Brutus's junior official out in the East, as Brutus was raising money to fight against Rome back at home. Book 2 is going to be 20 years later when we find that same person in his middle age, having come back to Rome, been forgiven, basically kept his head down, decided he's going to go with the establishment just to survive. And then out of the blue, he is asked to take the top job in Rome, that of consul. Top job, I mean, under the Emperor Augustus, who was carefully not called emperor at the time. And it's all about the kind of sham of what Roman politics is like at that time, how everyone has to very carefully remember to not say that Augustus is a dictator and an emperor, someone in charge. You have to call him the prince, which just means leading citizen. And you have to pretend that everything is as normal. And so we still have consuls. And there is Lucius going through this charade of being consul. And how does a man like him with his background actually survive doing something so hypocritical? So that's novel number 2. And I've got a vague idea for novel number 3.
So, could you tell us how has the Second Life community helped you become a better writer?
Oh, it's been absolutely instrumental. I looked through what I wrote in my mid-20s, and it was cringeworthy. And I'm not saying that the rewrite is good, but there are bits of it that I am quite proud of. It's very difficult to stand back and judge your own writing. Many of you have heard this story, but a few weeks ago, my father read the first novel, and his critique was that I should stick with writing non-fiction. So I decided that I would go ahead nonetheless. But what Second Life has done is given me a structure. It's given me things like NaNoWriMo, which give you immense pushes in your writing. It gave me poetry writing, poem a day for a month. That actually developed the character of my hero's sister. It was at that moment that she became a poet, and some of her poems have appeared in the novel. And they're poems that I wrote here in Milkwood for that poetry writing.
And now, a reading from.
Oh, yes.
Sorry, no, go ahead. Go right ahead. Finish.
Well, I've chosen a passage which I hope you'll forgive me. It's in the middle, but I wanted to read it to you because it is a passage that came entirely out of Milkwood's Writing Dashes and Poetry Writing Month. And I thought it was a kind of tribute to what Milkwood has helped me to do.
Wonderful. And for those of you who are watching this on YouTube, we are currently in Milkwood Sim, and we meet every morning at 6 a.m. Pacific Standard Time and at 8 a.m. Pacific Standard Time for write-ins. And you can come down and meet with us and learn more about that at your leisure. And now, reading from Fiona Forsyth.
Albinia, Lucius's full sister, is 3 years older than him. Their mother died when Lucius was born, and Publius Cestius married Cornelia 2 years later. So as far as Lucius can remember, Cornelia is his mother. But Albinia has a few memories of their real mother, and when the 2 of them were children, she would tell him about her. Highly dubious tales, Lucius now realizes. But Cornelia proved her wisdom by never intruding on these memories. That is one of many reasons why Lucius and Albinia get on so well with her and their half-sister. Lucius is very fond of Cornelia and Tia, but he counts Albinia as his closest family member, and they have managed to maintain the closeness formed in childhood now that she is married to Marcus Apuleius and living in her own home. Her husband is a nice chap from a decent family who also chose wisely when it came to the Civil War. He has just entered the Senate as quaestor. Lucius thinks, not for the first time, that his acquaintance now falls into 3 neat groups of people. Those who had chosen Caesar at the start of the Civil War, those who hadn't, and those who had chosen wrongly at first and then reconciled with the dictator. The last group is surprisingly large, and nowadays its members are likely to be found close to the dictator. Cicero, for example, found himself welcomed back into the folds of Caesar's toga with little fuss and a genuine welcome. And he decided to live out of the political spotlight as a sign of gratitude. It also means that he feels free to express the occasional gentle criticism of the dictator, thus ensuring that Caesar looks more accountable. Lucius sighs. He lives in a pragmatic age. The journey from the Caelian hill to the Velia is an easy one this morning, though as usual, The crowds slow him down as he approaches the forum. He turns off the sacred way, goes up the slight rise, and meets Marcus Apuleius, bustling out of the front door as he arrives. Lucius, good to see you. Just on my way to the treasury. Don't imagine you want to come, do you? You could explain what that awful clerk of mine tells me. Of all the highly educated and intelligent young men elected to the quaestorship that year, Marcus Apuleius is possibly the worst choice bequeathed to the treasury. He has a brain and is a sociable creature and got on very well in the army, but he has no patience with detailed reports of income and expenses. He was fortunate to enter the position just as it was vacated by a highly competent official, and he has an equally competent chief clerk. He is also completely trustworthy and thinks Caesar is the best thing to ever happen to the Republic. He thinks Albinia is the next best thing, though Lucius likes Marcus Apuleius, even though he doesn't understand him. I'll let you handle that on your own, Lucius replies heartlessly. Is Albinia in? Yes, she's in her study. Something to do with dactylic hexameters as usual, says his brother-in-law, who is very proud of Albinia's writing. Apuleius sails down the street, and Lucius goes into the house. The door slave knows him well enough to let him make his own way through the traditional atrium, and then through to the tiny peristyle garden at the back. Albinia's study is much nicer than his study back in the house on the Kylian. It looks out over the garden if you pull the door back, and Albinia has had it painted in bands of colours, decorated with tiny pictures of flowers. There's a comfortable couch as well as a chair and desk, and one wall is taken up with book cubby holes. Albinia is seated at the desk and looks up as he knocks on the doorway and comes in. Her face breaks into a grin. She hugs her brother, sits him on the couch and calls for fruit juice and wine, before getting herself settled at the desk again, angling the chair so as to be able to face him. I hope you have news or gossip or something interesting, Lucius, she begins. I'm as bored as Hades, and this new work just won't go where I want it. Albinia is a pretty good poet, and she's well known among the serious literature set. She was even friends with the great Catullus before he died, and he had written a witty and insulting little poem to Publius Cestius as a compliment to the family. At least Albinia says it's a compliment, and her father has shown nothing other than delight and pride at being insulted by the darling of the literati. Every now and then she and Apuleius hold a small dinner party, and she reads a poem or two, but she's never made any more of her talent than this. She says she doesn't need to make a living, doesn't want to attract a literary patron, and doesn't feel inspired to educate the masses through verse. So just knowing her work is valued by family and friends is enough. Lucius thinks that if she were a man, her work would be much better known and more widely appreciated. She once wrote a little poem based on some Greek poet or other. It was about Cupid being stung by a bee. The naughty little love god tries to steal honey and gets a sharp sting on the hand in return. He jumps up and down, blowing on the sting and crying. The wailing boy god runs to Venus, arm extended, finger pointed. The bee falls in the grass and dies. But the boy doesn't notice and cries still. How can such a tiny creature cause so much hurt? His mother laughs. Aren't you just like the bees? So tiny and yet capable of so much hurt. And mankind goes on, feeling the sting of love. And that poem is an actual translation of one by the Greek poet Theocritus, but I pretended that Albinia had taken it over. And that was huge fun, writing those poems and then inserting them into the novel, sometimes with a shoehorn, but fun.
My lady, you still have 10 minutes left allowed to read.
I do.
Yes.
Oh, well. I thought, right, in which case, could I read you an account of a journey in Roman North Africa from later on in the novel?
Absolutely. Please.
Okay, just nudge me when you want me to stop.
All right. I will cough.
Right, we're now in the middle of the whole sort of mystery, and Lucius has teamed up with a Subora low-class type Roman called Cornelius Rufus. As they set off for Africa Nova, Lucius feels neither excitement nor fear, but a sense that he will soon find an answer. He's almost satisfied with life. Cornelius and he are in no hurry, and there are many stops on their journey along the coastline. The border between old and new Africa is vague, to say the least, but when they enter a village where the headman identifies himself as the servant of King Juba, they know they have crossed an invisible line. King Juba no longer rules Numidia. After running away from the Battle of Thapsus, King Juba died in a mutual suicide fight with that pattern of the old-fashioned military hero, Marcus Petreius. Lucius' father knew Petreius. They fought the Battle of Pistoria against Catalina together. When Petreius' death was announced in Rome, Publius Cestius had sighed, but said, "A good end for someone like him." Petreius, a good man forced to make a choice, and dying because of that choice, is the supreme example of what is so wrong with civil war. And now, King Juba's infant son has been taken by Caesar to Italy and shown off in a triumphal procession. And the kingdom the little boy should have inherited is a Roman province. Africa Nova is not as Romanized as old Africa. Before they reach the capital, they encounter many settlements, but few with an inn. Lodgings are easily available, though. They find the headman of each village, and he points out one or two households where they might find a bed for the night. The hospitality they find may be simple, but no mention is ever made by their hosts of the Roman occupation of their land, now well over a year old. Every day someone sets them onto the road, with much pointing and smiling, as though it is a delight to be inconvenienced by their conquerors. But as at that first village, the allegiance of the people is still turned towards a king who deserted them. The old couple who put them up on the first night refused their Roman money, very politely, but definitely. After a quick conversation in the corner, Cornelius and Lucius offer blankets, then food, but these two are refused. Rather unexpectedly, they are successful with a small scroll of Greek poems that Lucius has optimistically brought along to read on the road. The old man holds it carefully, and while he and his wife cannot read the poems, they like the strangely marked papyrus, with its neat red ribbon and tag, and from the reverent way in which it is placed in the household chest, Lucius thinks it will be cherished for a long time. He wonders about the likelihood of anyone with a good knowledge of both classical Greek and the local dialect ever coming to the village to explain the meaning to them. Cornelius Rufus tells him not to be so patronizing. Well, he doesn't actually say patronizing, but that's what he means. "You've got to remember," Cornelius says, "Greeks have been in North Africa for hundreds of years. Don't know why, but they have. What about our host back in Utica? You know his mother is Greek because you asked him how come he knows Greek so well. And where did he get a name like Cyprius? Hey, presto, he chose Cyprius because its mum's from Cyprus." He is right, of course. Soon after this, they find one village leader who speaks enough Greek to hold a conversation. And he suggests that wherever they stay, they give a certain amount of money to the chief man, so that he can take it along whenever the governor's touring court circuit is near. At such a gathering, even Roman money will be able to buy something for the good of the village. And King Juba, it appears, won't mind. Lucius wonders how many of these people have accepted that Juba is dead. And I chose that passage because it's an example of where you know absolutely nothing. The novelist just makes it all up. Nothing in there has been substantiated by any form of evidence whatsoever. I like that bit.
Do you have a 5-minute part you'd like to share with us?
I don't, because I just chose those two bits and thought that that would be enough for everyone. And it
All
is
right.
now 15:15, so.
Well, in that case, I would like to turn it over to the audience. I'm just realizing now that I didn't really get a chance to offer questions earlier. So if anyone has questions for either writer, please, if you have a comment, type a C into chat. And if you have a question, please type Q, and your question will be taken in order. All right, we have a question from Edmund Brooke. Go ahead, Edmund, please. And I, and I think Edmund is typing it in, so I will read it for the benefit of YouTube. Finn, tell us about your avatar. It looks classical.
I'll just do a 12 for you. This was the nearest I could find to what a Roman lady like Albinia would wear. She would wear a tunic with a kind of elaborate shawl draped over it called a stola. She'd be able to pull the folds of the stola over her head when she was in public if she wanted to be modest. And at the time that I'm writing, Roman ladies would probably just have a little updo, like I'm wearing them. Nicole will tell you it took some time and effort to find a hairstyle that was Roman, but we had fun looking for it. I did put on a modesty camisole underneath because no Roman lady would show any part of her body, especially as she was walking outdoors, unless, of course, she wanted to be thought of as a prostitute. Alas. So that's my avatar, Edmund.
And I believe that they were called something to the effect of a day wife or a wife of the day prostitutes.
Really?
I so.
I only know the really dirty names for prostitutes because I've read Catullus. Sorry.
Oh, please share with us the
Okay.
really dirty name.
Porne would be a sort of polite way of putting it. But if you wanted a sort of chatty, rather dismissive word, then you would call your lady friend a scotillum, which means little tart. Sort of affectionate, but not very respectful.
Indeed. And do we have any more questions or comments from the audience? Just giving people time to type if they need to.
I think people are silently saying, can we get some coffee?
So, again, I want to remind you that the books to my left, you can click on them to be taken to links to these books. And the tip jar, the money goes to our illustrious authors. And I want to thank Harriet Guzman for this concept, and I hope you have enjoyed this interview at Author a la carte. Thank you everyone so much for coming.
Thank you very much for allowing me to have a talk about my book. I thoroughly enjoyed it.
Yes, a big applause. I'd like to give a big applause for our two authors. And thank you for taking the time to come and join us. And I hope you'll join us next time. Have a great day, everyone.